It was a sweltering August night in 1974. A young couple, parked on a secluded lover's lane outside Texarkana, had no idea they were about to come face to face with a nightmare that would haunt a town and baffle police for decades. The car door wrenched open and terror began. Now imagine this, a small town, Texarkana, straddling the Texas-Arkansas border. It's the mid-1940s. People know their neighbors. Folks leave their doors unlocked. And an evening drive with your sweetheart, maybe to a quiet, secluded spot, is just a simple pleasure. Nobody thinks about danger. Nobody expects a trap. But for a few unlucky young couples, that simple pleasure turned into a horrifying walk into the unknown, a journey into a nightmare they couldn't escape. The victims? Primarily young couples, high school students or young adults. They were just looking for a bit of privacy, a little romance on those isolated roads around Texarkana. They had no idea they were about to become targets in a series of brutal, seemingly random attacks. The horror started in February 1946. Then, after a brief pause, it resumed with terrifying intensity in the spring and summer of that same year. We're talking about a string of brutal attacks. Victims were shot, they were beaten. Sometimes it was both. The killer often tied up one victim before attacking the other, and in a chilling twist, he sometimes used their own car to abduct them. The attacks themselves felt random when it came to who he picked, but the method and the location, always consistent. Isolated spots, late at night. By the time it was over, 4 couples had been attacked, and 5 people were dead. The fear in Texarkana was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that settled over everyone. Let's rewind to the beginning, to the initial shock and how the town tried to respond in the spring of 1946. The very first attack happened on February 22, 1946. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry were parked on a secluded road. The killer approached their car, ordered them out, and then things escalated quickly. Jimmy Hollis was shot twice, but incredibly he survived. Mary Jean Larry was severely beaten with a pistol. They were left for dead, but they survived. The police found them in their car, blood everywhere. It was a shocking start, but at this point, investigators probably thought it was an isolated incident, maybe a robbery gone wrong or a jealous lover. But then, just about a month later, on March 24th, another couple was found. Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. They were discovered in Griffin's car, parked on a dirt road. Both had been shot to death. This time, there were no survivors. The town started to whisper. Was this connected? Was someone hunting young lovers? The clues were scarce at first. Footprints were found at several scenes, but they seemed inconsistent in size. A bloody pillow, a pistol missing from one of the victims' cars. Small details, but nothing that screamed serial killer to the local sheriffs and city police. They were overwhelmed, Texarkana, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas are right next to each other, so law enforcement from both sides had to work together. They formed a joint task force, set up roadblocks, and increased patrols, especially around those known lovers' lanes. They were trying their best with what they had. Initial suspects were all over the place. They looked at local delinquents, then a guy who had a known grudge against one of the victims. But there was no strong evidence, no real leads that stuck. And the attacks kept coming, despite the increased patrols. It was like the killer was taunting them, showing just how brazen he was. Then came April 13th. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker. They were found shot and beaten, just like the others. Paul was dead. Betty Jo was barely alive when she was found, clinging to life, but she later succumbed to her injuries. The terror was starting to really sink in. This wasn't random anymore. This was a pattern. The realization was dawning that a monster was loose in their town. This brings us to Phase 2, when the Texas Rangers rolled in during the summer of 1946. The local authorities were clearly out of their depth, so the big guns were called in, the legendary Texas Rangers. Leading the charge was Captain M.T. Lone Wolf Gonzalez. This guy was a real character, a no-nonsense lawman known for his tenacity. He brought a whole new level of sophistication to the investigation. We're talking about early ballistics analysis, crime scene photography, and extensive interviewing. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he took over coordinating the multi-jurisdictional effort. The attacks, shockingly, continued even after the Rangers arrived. On May 3, 1946, a farmer named Virgil Starks was shot dead in his home. His wife, Katie, was also shot, but she survived. This was a chilling escalation. It wasn't just young couples in cars anymore. Now the killer was entering homes. Katie Starks, traumatized but resolute, provided the first real description of the killer. She said he was wearing a white cloth mask with eye holes. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the first time anyone had seen his face, even if it was just a mask. A single tire track was found near the Starks' home, another piece of the puzzle, though a frustratingly small one. Under Gonzalez's leadership, the investigation started to gain traction. And then came the major breakthrough: ballistics. Forensics experts were able to confirm that the same .32 automatic pistol was used in the last 3 attacks: the Griffin Moore murders, the Martin Booker murders, and the Starks attack. This was it. This confirmed it. They weren't dealing with multiple killers or random acts of violence. This was one person. This was a serial killer. The town officially had a phantom killer on their hands. Hundreds of suspects were interviewed, every lead chased, but the phantom remained elusive. The nickname stuck, a chilling reminder of the invisible threat lurking in the shadows. Now, imagine being in Texarkana during the summer and fall of 1946. This was Phase 3, the panic and the rise of the ghost hunters. After the Starks murder, the killer seemed to vanish. No new physical evidence surfaced. It was like he just disappeared into thin air. The town was gripped by fear, absolute, paralyzing fear. Curfews were imposed. Parents kept their kids indoors. Gun sales skyrocketed. You know, everyone buying a weapon to protect themselves. Citizen posses formed. Ordinary people, armed to the teeth, patrolling the roads, looking for any sign of the phantom. It was a desperate situation. The Rangers, led by Lone Wolf Gonzalez, continued their relentless interviewing. They were trying to find anyone who acted suspiciously, anyone who owned a .32 pistol, anyone who seemed out of place. But without new attacks, without new leads, it became a slow, grinding process. The lack of new attacks was a mystery in itself. Did the killer get caught for another crime somewhere else? Did he just leave town? Was he killed? The questions swirled, and the phantom killer became a local legend, a terrifying bedtime story, and a source of constant dread. People just didn't know what to think. Decades passed, and the case of the phantom killer slowly faded from the headlines, but never from the minds of the people who lived through it. This brings us to Phase 4, the cold case and modern efforts. For years, no new clues surfaced. The original case files, while extensive for their time, completely lacked what we'd consider modern forensic techniques today. No DNA evidence, no advanced ballistics. A lot of the physical evidence from back then is now degraded or even lost to time. But the case officially remains open. In recent years, local law enforcement and even a lot of armchair detectives have revisited those old files. They're hoping that maybe, just maybe, new technology or a fresh pair of eyes might reveal something that was missed. There have been efforts to re-examine existing evidence, But it's a tough uphill battle when you're dealing with evidence that's over 70 years old. So, what about suspects? What about theories? Who was this monster who terrorized Texarkana? The strongest yet unproven lead points to a man named Ewell Swinney. He was a local petty criminal, known for his violent tendencies and generally being a troublemaker. His wife, Peggy, allegedly told police that he was the killer. She even reportedly described details of the murders. That's huge, right? But here's the problem. Her testimony was deemed inadmissible due to spousal privilege. You can't force a wife to testify against her husband. And later, she even recanted, claiming police coercion. Was she telling the truth the first time? Was she pressured? We'll never know for sure. Some people also said they saw him with a .32 pistol, the same type of weapon used in the killings. He was never charged with the Phantom Killer murders, but he did spend time in prison for other crimes. It's a frustrating dead end, a tantalizing what if. Then there's the lone wolf theory. This suggests the killer was a disturbed individual, acting alone. Maybe a transient, someone just passing through, or someone with a deep-seated anger that manifested in these brutal attacks. The lack of any clear connection between the victims certainly supports this idea. He just picked people at random. Another theory, the local hunter, suggests the killer was someone intimately familiar with the back roads and secluded areas around Texarkana. Someone who knew exactly how to disappear without a trace in his own backyard. This person would know all the best spots for a lover's lane and all the best escape routes. And finally, the less likely copycat theory. While ballistics definitely linked most of the attacks, some people wonder if that very first attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larey was by a different person, and then the real Phantom Killer was inspired to start his own reign of terror. It's less likely, given the consistent pattern that emerged, but it's a theory that's been floated. Here's the chilling revelation, the twist that still haunts Texarkana to this day. The Phantom Killer was never caught. The case remains officially unsolved. We don't have a name, we don't have a face. The most chilling theory, the one that keeps people up at night, is that the killer simply stopped. Maybe he moved away. Maybe he was imprisoned for another unrelated crime. Or maybe, and this is truly terrifying, maybe he just died. We have absolutely no idea why the attacks abruptly ceased. He just vanished. Justice was never served for the victims and their families. Imagine the trauma, the lingering fear, the questions that never got answered. The town of Texarkana lived in fear for months, and the legend of the Phantom Killer continues to haunt the area. The surviving victims, like Mary Jean Larey and Katie Starks, carried that trauma for the rest of their lives. Law enforcement, on the other hand, learned some valuable, albeit painful, lessons about interagency cooperation and the immense challenges of investigating a serial killer before modern forensics were even a thing. The Texarkana Phantom Killer disappeared as mysteriously as he arrived, leaving behind a trail of blood and a chilling question. What kind of monster just stops? And how many times does a killer walk among us, completely undetected, until they simply choose to fade away? It's a terrifying thought, one that lingers in the quiet corners of Texarkana even today.